This is Diana Sullivan. I'm putting up 2 videos today because I have a new beret pattern. Many of you have made my tam patterns. Here's one that I have demonstrated for adults, and you can see the ribbing on the bottom of the hat. However, this new pattern does the short rowing automatically. Now, the first video that I'm putting up today is this one, which is plain, and it has the automatic short rowing, but it does not have lace. The second one I'm going to put up has the lacy top of the hat, and the band and the bottom is the same. But the technique is a little different, hence 2 videos. Now, these new patterns with the automatic short rowing require a Brother or Knit King standard gauge electronic machine. If you have a different machine, please look in the description box for information about knitting the tams using a different method. This pattern has the sizes for baby, toddler, child, and adults. And for each size, you can automatically short row a plain tam, or if you want lace, there are 4 different lace patterns for each size. In today's video, I'm doing a ribbed hat band. If you don't have a ribber, the pattern also discusses how to do a hem to hat band. But here in the video, I wanted to show some tips for knitting a successful ribbed hat band. First, I set my machine up for ribbing. I'm going to start with a zigzag row, so I have this slide lever over to the right. I have the very tightest tension on the ribber, and all of these sliders are down. On the main bed, all the buttons are popped out, and I'm on the very tightest tension. Note that the tightest tension is smaller than 0. I turn the dial beyond 0 until the dial won't turn anymore. And I'm going to put on 73 stitches on each side of 0, but it's going to be set up in knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. So I'm going to go from needle 73 on the right using my every other needle pusher, over to 72 on the left, because I'm going to have a total of 146 stitches, so I'm going to have that 73rd stitch on the left be on the ribber. Now on the ribber, I'm putting out the in-betweens. My machine is set to P, which is full pitch, which means that the needles slide past each other and there's these needles out of work in between, so it all lines up properly. I will go across and back to line up the needles. These are things I just nearly always do when I cast on with my ribber. Now I'm going to thread the ribber and put in that zigzag row. So I've got my yarn here, and I hold it like this across the bed and just let gravity drop it between the beds. And I hook it in the carriage and go across slowly. That makes my zigzag row. Now, I'm known for making all kinds of stupid mistakes, so I like to take a moment and make sure I have good zigzags and that I didn't pick out an extra needle or do anything like that. Next job is to put in the comb. For this, I have to use the long comb, and I'm not using every single prong on the comb because I'm only going over to 73 on each side. So I'm getting my comb positioned, and then I'm going to pull the wire partially out. So the wire is still started in the comb anyway. Then I bring the comb up, and then I work the wire in, work that wire all the way in. You know, your wires are always safest when they're inside your comb, so don't leave any sticking out. Besides, wires sticking out on either end could hang up somewhere and then the comb wouldn't go down. I'm going to use 3 large weights because this is a lot of stitches, so one of these large 1-pound weights on each end of the netting, plus one in the middle at the 0. Now I'm going to set my carriage for the circular rows. For the circular rows, I move the slide lever on the bottom of the ribber from 2 to 1. It's just below this wheel. And I change the tension dial to 0.2. There's 2 dots, so when somebody says 0.2, they mean go to that second dot before the 1. And then up on the right here, I have this slide lever. It goes up. It's going to make the machine not knit when it goes to the right. On the main carriage, I push the left part button in. It's going to make the machine not knit when it goes to the left. When it goes to the right, though, it's going to knit. And I change the top wheel on the main carriage over to the 0.2 tension. Just like the ribber, it's 1 click before 1, since we have 2 clicks between numbers. Now what I'm going to do is knit 3 rows. The first row knits the main bed stitches only. The second row knits the ribber stitches only. The third row knits the main bed stitches only. My next little task is to set this up for ribbing. My ribbing is going to be tension 2, so both carriages need to be on the 2. And I'm going to put this down so that it knits every stitch on the ribber, and click this so that it pops out that part button. It will knit every stitch on the main bed. Next, I'm putting my row counter on 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to knit 10 rows of this knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. As I knit ribbing, I just watch to make sure that my combs go down. If the combs don't go down, usually it's because a weight got caught on something in between the beds, and you can wiggle it and then it will go down. If they don't go down, the stitches won't form properly. The ribber needs a lot more weight than plain stockinette knitting with no ribber. Now that's my ribbed band. I can't see it forming because it's between the beds. That's one of the frustrations of learning to work with both beds. But one of the things I have learned here is that for me to work this particular band, the very next step is to get every one of these ribber stitches onto the corresponding needle on the main bed. Now there's more than a couple ways of doing that. Let me show you 2 anyway. One way to do that is to use this tool. It's a double eye tool, came with your ribber, and you just take a stitch from the ribber needle by pulling up and down on the needle, and then you pop it onto the main bed needle. And that's pretty quick and effective. Now another way to do this is to use 2 of these 7-stitch transfer tools. You can use 2, 3-stitch tools or whatever, but I like the 7-stitch ones because I've got every other prong up. So what I do is I take a tool and I put it on 4 needles at once, and I go up, down. Once I've done that, the stitches are on this tool, and I can take the other tool and slide it in from below and put all 4 stitches surprisingly easily onto the new tool. Then I take the first tool out and pop these right onto the main bed. Now, what's nice about that is it does 4 at a time. So here, let me get 4 more stitches on my tool and 4 more stitches on my second tool, and then hang those on the main bed needles. It's a shortcut. Like a lot of things, some people love it, some people don't care for it, but I think it's awfully nice for you to know about it. I'm going to get all my stitches moved, and then I'll come back and show you how to fix a boo-boo. Now, if you have unfortunately dropped a stitch, It's usually going to be a ribber stitch because those were the ones you were moving. And I've dropped a couple. So what I do is I put my latch tool in the stitch, and then I can latch it on up. I find this easier if I can catch the stitch with my fingers down below where I'm latching. And it's real easy to latch these up because you're latching up a knit stitch. Now here's one. Get right in the middle of that stitch. Okay, and then catch the column of stitches below it with my fingers. That gives me a little leverage to tug downward as I latch. Come on now, get on there. There we go, got it that time. Got to get those loops inside your tool. And that fixes it very quickly. Now, in my case, I have found that it is much easier to see and pick up these stitches for my band if I move them to the main bed, and then I take them off on several rows of waste yarn. After I transferred all my stitches to the main bed, I just changed to my regular sinker plate and put about 6 rows of a strongly contrasting waste yarn. Look, I went with black. And that will really help me to pick up these stitches because they really pop visually next to that black. So I'll go ahead and go on to the next part. Now I'm going to show how to automatically shape a tam using one of my patterns. Now, you can shape these tams using short rowing, and I've taught that for years. It's easy, but if you have to make a lot of them, or you want to save time, or you want to add a lace design, automatic short rowing is really useful for this little pattern. Maybe you've got Christmas right around the corner, or maybe you're working on a craft show or something. So I'm going to do this in the baby size. Now I want you to see that I am making short rowed triangles, but they're not exactly a triangle. If you were to lay this flat, you would see that they're a triangle with a flat area on the edge. So in my case, I'm making little triangles because I'm going to do the baby size. To do the automatic short rowing, you need a stitch pattern set up in your Brother or your Knit King machine memory. My new pattern comes with a lot of different charts, since each of the 4 sizes has a plain version like this one, plus 4 different lace designs. You can put the chart in manually or download a file using Design and Knit and a cable. See the description box for more information. Today's baby beret has this simple chart, which is available free. I want you to be able to try this interesting technique and see what you think. For the free chart, see the links in the description box below the video. I have already put this pattern in the memory of my machine. Now you can't do this with punch cards because this pattern, which is the smallest of my patterns, it's the infant size, is only 30 stitches wide, but that's still wider than your 24 stitch punch cards. So I'm going to start with waste yarn. That's just a good way to do these, because at the end I have to sew the first edge to the last edge. So the waste yarn makes it really easy to see the loops that I'm going to sew. I'll just put a clothespin on there. I'll hang a comb on there. I've done every other needle. I'm putting one weight on there. And now I'm going to put the in-between needles into work, plus one more on the left, so that I end up with a total of 30 stitches. I'm going to bring my carriage on the left outside the turn mark, and I'm going to put it on KC2. KC2 is the setting where it doesn't automatically kick out the end needles. And then I approach the knitting and I thread with the hat yarn and I knit from left to right. It knitted across and it picked these few needles on the right. Let's zoom in at that so you can see it. You see these needles were selected and these needles are back in B position. I'm going to put my clothespin there. That'll help that end needle to knit off. And I'm going to get my band. I hold my band so that I can see the stitches well. You see the waste yarn's curling away from me and the stitches are clear little dots in between the black. But if I held it this way, I really couldn't see much at all. Also, I experimented with doing the waste yarn as ribbing, and it makes it really hard to pick up the stitches. So let's keep it easy. For the first row only, I'm going to pick up the second stitch onto this end needle. It's a selected needle. And I'm going to pick up the first stitch after that. It's a selvage stitch. It's for sewing a nice little seam in the hat band. And then I'm going to push that back. Another thing I'm going to do before I can proceed is I am going to put my carriage on slip. With this brother carriage, I push in both of the part buttons, and then it will slip unless the needles are selected. Looking at the needles I've got, as you can see, this first little bunch is selected. It's going to knit those when I go to the left, and it is going to skip from there over. Didn't knit those after that. And when I go back, it's only going to knit those ones sticking out in D position. Now, every time my carriage is on the right, I have to hang another loop from the hat band. This loop is already hung. I can see it attached to the knitting. This is my next loop, and it's real easy to grab it and put it on because it's so easy to see it. Knit 2 rows and hang a loop. Now before I go any farther, let's put weight on. This is a short rowing job and we need weight. So I'm going to put one on the right and I'm going to go over and put one on the left. For most of the sizes, I put 3 weights, but these baby hats are so tiny that I only bother with 2. Knit 2 rows, hang a stitch. Oh, it's so easy. 1, 2, and hang. 1, 2, and hang. The lace one involved doing two passes with the knit carriage, 2 passes with the lace carriage. But with this automatic way, with no lace, all I have to do is use the main carriage. So you can see how very fast I'm able to go, not having to do any short rowing. I have, of course, experimented with different ways to put the hat band on. For me, this is the quickest and most beautiful method. It gives a very, very professional finish, and you don't have to sit and do so much sewing at the end of the project. You can just really get these done. And I can watch my colors changing because my yarn is so good. This is a good quality sock yarn. And it is self-striking. Sometimes the dots are a little small, but I always get more. One of the things you can do if you have some difficulty picking up those stitches is you can use a tool like this. This is called a unicorn and it has a sharp point. It's a nice tool. I use it sometimes. But honestly, with this yarn, I don't even need it for this little project. I'm going to do one complete triangle so you can see that. And I don't want to bore you, so after that I'm going to do things off camera. because each triangle is just alike, so that would be a lot of repetition. When I get to the last row of the triangle, my machine's going to beep, because that last row of the triangle will be the last row of the pattern, and then it'll go back to row 1 again automatically. And row 1 will look different. This way you can see one whole triangle before I keep on going. Okay, over I go, and it beeps. Now I'm just going to, this one time, pull this out between the beds and show it to you. This is the shape it makes. It's a triangle. It's a triangle to here, and then there's a little straight section right here, which is exactly what we need for this design. The design was made to use up every one of these band stitches as I knit 6 sections. So when I do this next row, which will be the first row of the next design selected, see, it knitted over, but now here I am ready to do row 1. It only picked out a few stitches again. So once again, it's going to start another triangle, starting with this little section, and then it begins making the triangle bigger, picking out one more needle every 2 rows. Now, one of the things I like to do when I get to a new triangle is move the right hand weight up and move the left hand weight up. Notice my left hand weight isn't all the way out at the point. I really don't need it to be way out there. It's just fine about an inch in from the point. And every time my carriage is on the right, I pick up another stitch. Now I'm just going to keep on knitting, and I'll be back after I've made most of my 6 triangles. Here I am at almost the very tail end of the job. I have 3 more loops on my band to pick up, and I go to the left and to the right, and I pick up another one. Now all the stitches are selected. When I get to this point where all the stitches are selected, what I like to do is pick up 2. That uses up that last band loop, so I don't need to do an extra row to get that. And I knit to the left. It knits everything. My last row is actually going to be the graft. So I need some yarn for grafting. I'll just pull some down and use that. That will be for grafting. And I'm going to take the little hat off on waste yarn. When I'm on the left here, I've threaded my carriage with waste yarn, and I'm going to turn off needle selection, which makes my buttons pop out. So now it's just on plain knitting, which is what I want for my waist knitting. I just make sure that knitted through, and it did. And that's plenty of waste yarn. So I did quite a fussy little short row job, and I did it quickly by using the patterning in my Brother electronic machine. But here's my little hat top, and I'm going to need to do a graft from here to here and a mattress stitch from here to here. I need to close my center, and then I need to block it. So those are the next steps on my fun little tam. And isn't my new sock yarn pretty? I really got a kick out of that. I had not used this yarn before, so I was curious what the colors would look like. Once the tam is off the machine, I've removed the waste yarn from the band area. It simply unravels, so it's quite easy. And here's the little thing I have. It's quite lumpy because this one's wool, and the wool really emphasizes this shaping, but I will block it flat. That's how I like it. Maybe you would like your tam to have all this texture, but I like it flat. And I have to do a seam here, from here to here. I'm going to demonstrate that briefly. This is nothing but a graft, but I always get a question about it whenever I do a graft with triangles like this, because what happens is one side is quite a lot longer than the other side. So let me show you how that works. Look how short this side is, and then look how long this side is. So we're going to graft this to this, and you're thinking, well, that's not going to work, but it does work because it's the exact same number of stitches. What's making it longer is the same thing that makes the hat have this swirl in the top center. And the swirl, of course, is so pretty. It's really a feature. This will fit together just fine, just like it fit together when I was making the triangles. That is, this will just gather ever so slightly all the way along. And after I've grafted, it will look exactly like the other section joins where I just kept knitting. So I find my long piece of yarn for sewing up, and it's here. And I'm just going to trim this short so it doesn't bug me. That's just waste yarn to be removed later. I'm going to thread the needle, and I have lately been putting the things I try to film for the sewing up on a towel, because that gives you something that doesn't move while I'm sewing, and hopefully you can see a little better. So zooming in on that, it's easy to see the stitches next to the waste yarn. All these little dots are the stitches through which I need to sew, and my first stitch is right here. You can see this is my blue yarn. It came out of that stitch. So that stitch is a bit loose, but it'll tighten when I pull the blue yarn. And then I go across to the other side and find the first stitch. It's that one. And I'm going to go straight across. I find it easiest to do this graft from the purl side of the work, because on the purl side of the work I can see all these stitches so easily. Now, I have come out right here, see my yarn, I go next door to a new stitch, then I go across to that first old stitch. So it's next door and then across this street. And I draw that up. Then I go next door on this side, because you see my yarn's coming out there. If you get interrupted, you can tell where you were by where the yarn's coming out. And then I go across the street. Now, this is not drawn up super tight. Tight's a mistake. This mimics a row of knitting. So you want the little distances of these stitches to be like a row of knitting. And I find that I draw them up some until they don't draw comfortably. I don't yank them until they're gone, and that gives me a good effect. So I go across, and the more you do this, the better you get at it, because you just realize after a while how tight to draw the stitches. And I will just keep going next door and then back to the old stitch. It is always that new stitch next door and that old stitch across the street, all the way across the little seam. I have my other hand in there just for unrolling so that I can see my stitches as I work. This is how the graft is done. And I'm going to go ahead, put this whole graft in, and then come back. Here's what that seam looks like when I finish grafting it. it just looks like knitting because it goes exactly on the same route as a row of knitting would go. Now, one of the most satisfying moments when you've done a beautiful graft is getting the waste yarn off and seeing what you have. This side of the waste yarn will unravel. This side of the waste yarn has a finished edge. It was the beginning of the waste yarn. And what I'm going to do is find the end. It's this end right here that's close to the hat. Then I go to the other end and I cut the stitches that are closest to the hat. So I kind of work my little scissors in on that stitch. Then I go to this end. I go to this end where there's the string closest to the hat, and I pull. It's a little tight, but I just keep working it through. And then I get that waste yarn out, pull it off. Check out my graft. This row right here, that's my graft. It doesn't look any different in terms of stitch structure as this row right here because it was an invisible graft. As I said, very satisfying to get that off and see it. Now I need to do the center. We don't want a hole in the center. So what I do is I poke this piece of yarn through for sewing up the center. I find this easier to do from the purl side. And I get my needle, thread it with that piece of yarn. I am going to go through the large strands of yarn that are the most on top, the most close to the center as I view this. And then once I've gone around once, I draw that up, and you see how it pulls right up? Then I go around it again through those same bits of yarn. This will stay closed much better if you go around it twice. I do all of the centers this way, whether they're lace or they're a fancy stitch or they're just this plain stockinette. And then I have lots of places where I can hide this yarn. So I will just hide the end by going through the stitches for about an inch. I go through under these little horizontal bars. They hide very nicely. So there I've done my center and hidden my yarn. Let's view that from the right side. See how it closed up that center neatly? And of course the yarn's hidden. Now I still have one more little seam to do, and it is right here. This is the seam that sews this end of the band to this end of the band. And I'm just going to take this yarn, which will bother me, and put it out of my way because I'm planning to sew it with this piece. When I sew ribbing, I like to start at the cast-on edge, and I like to go under those very loops at the bottom of that edge, go under a couple on one side, and go under a couple on the other side. And what that does is it matches that up perfectly. So having that match up perfectly really helps to make it invisible. It's going to have a lump on the inside because I'm going to stitch a stitch from the edge. Now on this side, I have a purl stitch that is really rolled up and not much to it, but I'm going to go right alongside the knit stitch. The knit stitch is a bunch of V's, and I'm going to go in the edge loop just beside those V's. And by that I mean the edge of that stitch. And then over on this side, I'm just going to unroll and go a stitch from the edge through one of the horizontal bars. Then I go to this side, I go in where I came out, and I get that next horizontal bar just to the side of that V. Go to this side, get my next bar, I just kind of unroll. Now I have found with these that since they're standard gauge and they're little, that sometimes I split the yarn, and if I split the yarn, it can be hard to pull up the mattress stitch later. So I like to just go a few stitches, pull up the mattress stitch, make sure everything is good, and then keep going. So on this side, my finger in there primarily, just to pull things open so maybe you could see better. But on this side, here's my next spot right there. And then on this side, my next spot right here. Let me get that little bump. Getting it, got it. Okay, then over here, next spot, got it. So it's only 10 rows of ribbing, and I'll get those 10 rows of ribbing sewn up, but I think you can already see that when I pull the slack out of that stitch, and I do pull tight, that the stitching vanishes. There is a lump on the back. The lump is the stitches that I sewed inside 2 of the stitches, so those stitches end up being pushed to the back. But it won't show on the front, it'll look really nice. So I'll get that sewn and be right back. Here's that finished ribbing seam. I think it blends in very nicely. Probably use a vertical tug, but there you go. I have to hide the ends on the inside. There are 3 ends in that spot. So I'll get those sewn in, and then we'll talk about blocking. Here's the unblocked hat, top and bottom, and I have a special method for blocking them that I will show you. For the adult size hats, I've been using a dinner plate. For the child hats, I've been using a salad plate. I've been using saucers for the toddler hats. I didn't have a plate small enough for this, so I found a plastic lid from something. I don't know if it was margarine or coffee or what it was, but it looked like a good size for this. And I have a piece of crochet cotton. It's white, and I'm threading that in my needle now. I'm taking the hat over to the wrong side. So I've gotten in close so you could really see where I'm putting my needle, and I am sliding my needle under the very top row of loops. I like to get under 2 loops for each stitch. And I'm going to go all the way around the hat doing that, and then I'll be right back. Once my string is sewed all the way around, I grab both ends and I tie a bow. Now I tighten it way too much because it slips out, and it always ends up bigger after I pull my bow. See? So I pull it like that, and that forms it into a nice shape. And then what I'm going to do is take it to the steamer, and I'm going to steam this flat. I'm going to steam it a lot because this is wool. So wool has a tendency to not stay the way you blocked it, so you can steam it a lot and it won't hurt it a bit. Acrylic cannot be steamed that hard. So I will steam this side, and then I will steam this side, and I'll let it dry, then I'll come back and show you how that turned out. Here it is, all blocked. I've just laid it on this towel, and it kind of stays there because of the fluffy nap. I'm really happy with that. That's what the front looks like. Here's what the back looks like. I haven't pulled my piece of string out, but of course I will. I just left it in there to make sure I was happy. Now let's try it on the baby. Here it is on my human-size baby doll. This doll looks like about a 6-month human size, and it's really cute. Look at it from the top and from the side. Other side, I've got it higher on one side and the back. If you're really needing warmth, of course, you could pull this down. And I just think these make a wonderful, unusual gift for the little ones in your life.